Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here, because today's story is one that's going to sit with you a while. His name is Niall Brennan. He's 57 years old, from Dublin, Ireland. Spent 32 years driving trains for Irish Rail. Same line, same platforms, same rhythm every single day. And when that rhythm stopped, when the thing that held his life together was suddenly gone, he did what a lot of men do. He looked for somewhere to put himself. He found the Philippines. Now, I want to be clear about something before we get into this. This is not a story about a man who got tricked by a stranger on the internet. It's not a bar girl story. It's not a cautionary tale about some obvious scam that anyone could have spotted from a mile away. This one is quieter than that, and in some ways, that makes it harder. Niall got married. He built something, or tried to. And somewhere along the way, between the life he thought he was building and the life that was actually taking shape around him, he lost something. Not everything, but enough. He's not angry about it. That's what got me. Sat down to tell his story, and the anger just wasn't there. Make of that what you will. Here's his story, in his own words. Right. So, I drove the Maynooth line, Dublin city centre out to Maynooth in Kildare and back again, Connolly station to Maynooth, Maynooth to Connolly. 32 years of it. People ask me, was it boring? And I never knew how to answer that, because boring wasn't really the point. The point was, it was reliable. The schedule was reliable. The route was reliable, and when you spend your life moving people from one place to another at the same time every day, you start to value that. Reliability. Things that show up when they're supposed to. Ine was reliable. We met when I was 23. I was working a depot job in Inchicore at the time, not even driving yet, and she was friends with a girl whose brother worked the same shift as me. That's the whole romantic story. We got married at 26, had the girls, Siobhan first, then a wife about 18 months later, and we bought a house in Clondalkin that we were still in 30 years later. It wasn't a glamorous life. I'm not going to pretend it was, but it was ours, and it worked, and we understood each other the way you do when you've been with someone long enough that you've stopped having to explain yourself. She had this garden out the back. Not large. It was a mid-terrace, you understand. Standard 1980s new build. But she'd done something with it. Roses along the wall, a little rockery, a table and 2 chairs that were out there from April to October, regardless of the Irish weather. I didn't really garden. I mowed the grass, and I stayed out of her way. She didn't mind. The morning she died, I left for work at 20 to 6. Early shift. She was still asleep. I didn't say goodbye because I never did on early shifts. She worked in a pharmacy, started at 9. There was no reason to wake her. And then I was at Clonsilla station when my mobile went, and it was Awif. And I knew immediately before she said a word, because Awif doesn't ring me at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. Cardiac event. That's what they called it. She was 54 years old, and she died in the kitchen, and by the time the ambulance arrived, it was already over. I went back to work after 10 days. People thought that was strange. My daughters worried about it, rang me about it, suggested I should take more time, and I understood what they were saying. But here's the thing about grief. And I'm not saying this to sound wise, I just mean it practically. Grief without structure is something I couldn't face. If I stayed home, I'd have had to figure out what the house was for now. What any of it was for. On the train, there was a timetable, and the timetable didn't care that Ine was gone. And I found that, strange as it sounds, I found that a relief. I drove the line for another year. Then Irish Rail offered an early retirement package. I was 56. The numbers worked. The pension would kick in and cover the basics. And I took it. And I sold the house because I couldn't manage the garden, and I didn't want to manage it, and I didn't want to sit at that table for two on my own. The sale cleared the mortgage and left me with 158,000 euros in an account I genuinely didn't know what to do with. Siobhan was in Cork by then, her own life, her own house. Our wife was in Toronto. They both worried about me from a distance in that particular way. Adult children worry, frequently checking in, never quite knowing what to say. I told them both I was grand. I wasn't grand. I was 56 years old, in a rented flat in Lucan, watching television I had no interest in. The YouTube thing started by accident. I was up late. I was always up late now, no early shifts to anchor me, and I found one of those expat videos, some fella talking about his cost of living in Southeast Asia. I don't even remember which country it was first, but I watched it, and then I watched another one, and then it was 2 in the morning, and I was watching a man my age sitting on a veranda somewhere warm, explaining that he was living well on 1,200 euro a month and didn't miss the cold at all. I watched a lot of those videos, every night for about 2 months. Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Portugal, Mexico. I kept coming back to the Philippines ones, partly because of the English. I knew myself well enough to know I wasn't going to cope somewhere I couldn't read a sign, but also because there was something familiar about it that I couldn't quite name at the time. Catholic country, family-focused, people who went to Mass and meant it. It wasn't Ireland, but it wasn't entirely alien either. I read the forums too. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I read all of it. The scam stories, the bar girl stories, the lads who'd lost their life savings, the ones who'd had houses built on land they couldn't own. I read all of it, and I thought, right. I know what I'm looking at now. I know what to avoid. I've thought about that a lot since. The particular confidence of having done your research. I flew into Manila in March, 90% humidity and traffic that made the M50 look like a country road. I'd booked 2 weeks in a guest house in Ermita while I got my bearings, and I spent most of those 2 weeks sweating and confused and slightly overwhelmed by the noise of everything. It wasn't what I'd imagined. I'm not sure what I'd imagined, but it wasn't this. I took a bus south before the 2 weeks were up. An expat forum had been consistent about Cebu, specifically the smaller towns on the southern end of the island. Cheaper than Cebu City, quieter, easier on a man who'd never really traveled outside of Ireland, and a package holiday to Lanzarote in 2009. I found a guest house in a town I'd never heard of, booked it for a month to see how it felt, and got on the bus. The town was small. One main road, a market, a basketball court in the middle of a dusty square that seemed to be in use at all hours. My guest house was run by a German man in his 70s who'd been there 20 years and had opinions about everything. The heat was enormous. At 6 in the morning, it was already warm in a way that Dublin manages maybe 4 days a year. The Carinderia was a 2-minute walk from the guest house. Small, open-fronted place, 4 plastic tables, stools instead of chairs. It smelled of garlic and rice, and something frying in oil, and I went in on the first morning because it was there, and I was hungry, and I didn't know where else to go. There was a woman behind the counter, 30-something, dark hair, an apron over a plain blue t-shirt. There was an older woman beside her, her mother, I'd find out later, who was doing most of the cooking. The younger woman was managing the front, taking money, keeping things moving. I sat down and I looked at the menu on the wall. Mostly Cebuano, some English. And I said something stupid about not knowing what half of it was, and something about the heat already at that hour. a self-deprecating thing. I do that when I'm uncomfortable. Make small jokes at my own expense. It's a very Irish habit. She laughed. Properly. Not a polite smile. Not a customer service reaction. She laughed like I'd actually said something amusing. Her name was Maravik. The Irish rail pension worked out to about €1,100 a month. Not lavish, but not nothing, and with €158,000 sitting in a credit union account back home, it meant I could live reasonably in Cebu without touching the capital at all. I'd done the sums: apartment, food, transport, a bit left over for day trips or whatever else came up. Around €1,100 a month, maybe €1,200 if I was careless. The YouTube fellas were right about that much, at least. The money stretched in a way it never would have in Dublin. So I went back to the Carinderia the next morning. And the morning after that, I told myself it was the food, which was partly true. Her mother made this chicken adobo, vinegary and dark, and I'd have eaten it every day if they'd let me. But it was also just somewhere to be, a place to sit for an hour with something in front of me. After a year of eating cereal in a flat in Lucan at whatever time the television suggested, having a reason to be somewhere at 7 in the morning felt unexpectedly important. Maravich and I talked. Slowly at first. She was busy in the mornings, in and out from the kitchen, managing the 4 tables and whoever was at the counter. But she'd stop and chat when things were quiet. Her English was careful, precise. She'd learned it properly, she told me later, because her mother had always said it was the way out. Out of what, exactly? She said, with a shrug that I understood to mean this. Not unhappily, just factually. I learned things about her in pieces over the first few weeks. Her husband had died 5 years before. Illness, she said, and didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. She had one son, J.R., 16 at the time. She was the eldest of 4, 2 brothers, 1 sister. Her parents lived in a barangay about 40 minutes outside town, in a house her father had built himself before his health got bad. The Carinderia had been her idea, set up after her husband died. She'd borrowed money from her mother and a cousin and paid it back within a year. She mentioned this without pride, just as information. She didn't ask me anything about money. Not what I had, not what my pension was, not what I'd sold my house for. She asked about Ireland, what it looked like, whether it really rained as much as they said, whether I missed it. She asked about my daughters and remembered their names the next time I mentioned them. Small things. The things you notice when you've been watching for something else and it doesn't come. I'm aware of how that sounds now. I'm aware that the absence of something isn't evidence of anything. But, at the time, it meant a great deal to me, and I think it's worth being honest about that. About 3 weeks in, she introduced me to J.R. He came in one morning before school. 16, taller than I'd expected. School uniform. A look on his face that I can only describe as thorough uninterest. He said hello because his mother was standing there. That was the full extent of it. He looked at me the way a teenager looks at a piece of furniture his mother has rearranged, aware of it, unenthused by it, prepared to work around it. I liked him for that, actually. It was honest. The first Sunday she took a day off from the Carinderia, and we took a habal-habal out to her parents' place. That's one of those motorcycle taxis. You sit behind the driver, sometimes with another person wedged between you, on roads that the word pothole doesn't adequately describe. I held on and said nothing, and she thought that was funny. Her parents' house was concrete block, painted yellow, with a small covered terrace at the front where her father sat. He was a quiet man, retired from whatever he'd done before his back gave out. Her mother was a smaller, sharper version of Maravich. Same practical efficiency, less patience for small talk. They were courteous to me in the careful way that means, we'll wait and see. There were chickens in the yard, a mango tree. Two of her siblings stopped by at some point in the afternoon, and there was a lot of cebuano I couldn't follow, and rice and fish for lunch, and cold San Miguel from a small refrigerator that sounded like it was having some difficulty. I sat on the terrace and sweated, and felt like a very large, very pale piece of furniture, and didn't mind it at all. I think that was the day I stopped counting. Not that I'd been counting deliberately. I just mean the days had a different quality after that. In Dublin, after Ine, each day had this weight to it, this requirement to be got through. In Cebu, time started moving differently, more like water than like stairs. I know that sounds like something from a bad film. I'm telling you anyway because it's true. The fridge situation at the Carinderia came up about 6 weeks in. She mentioned it in passing. The refrigeration unit was struggling. She'd had to throw out stock twice in the past month. She was trying to figure out what to do about it. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was wiping down the counter. I asked how much a replacement would cost. She said she'd have to get someone to look at it first. Maybe it was fixable. She hadn't decided yet. That was the end of it for that day. I thought about it for a week. I want to be accurate here. I thought about it. I didn't immediately offer. I went back and forth. The forums were loud in my head. Every story started with something small and reasonable. Every lad who'd lost everything said he'd done it one sensible step at a time. I knew that, but I also knew that the refrigeration unit was real. I'd seen it myself, heard it myself, watched her move things to her mother's cooler on the days it was unreliable. It wasn't a story. It was a machine that wasn't working properly in a small business run by a woman who was doing everything herself. I told her I'd cover it. 18,000 pesos, about 310 euros at the time. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said she couldn't accept that. I said I'd like to. She said she needed to think about it. 2 days later, she said, all right, and she looked, this is the bit I kept coming back to, she looked embarrassed. Not grateful in that performing way you get sometimes, that gratitude that's really something else dressed up. Just genuinely uncomfortable about accepting help. Like it went against some arrangement she had with herself. Maybe it did. I don't know. I think about that too. The new unit arrived on a Thursday. I was there when they installed it. She thanked me once, briefly, and then she went back to work, and we didn't discuss it again. Which felt right. Which felt like the correct weight for the thing. That was June. By July, I'd been in the guest house 4 months, and the German man's opinions had stopped being interesting about 2 months prior. I'd been thinking for a while about renting a proper apartment. The guest house was fine, but it was a guest house. You were always a visitor in it, always temporary, and I was starting to feel less like a visitor. I asked Maravich one evening, walking back from a Gaisano mall where we'd gone to get some things she needed, whether she'd consider moving in somewhere with me. If I got a place. She didn't answer immediately, kept walking, thinking. Then she said she'd need to think about it properly. That it was a big thing. That she had JR to consider. I said, of course, I meant it. She came back to me 2 weeks later. She said yes. We found a place on the 2nd floor of a concrete building about 10 minutes' walk from the Carinderia. 2 bedrooms, a small sala, a kitchen with a gas hob, and a window that looked out onto the street below. The landlord was a retired school teacher who lived downstairs and watered his plants at 6 every morning with an attention to detail that I found quietly impressive. Monthly rent was 18,000 pesos, About €310, which I covered entirely, that being the obvious and sensible arrangement given the circumstances. I didn't frame it as generosity. I was moving into her town, her neighborhood, her life. It was the least that was reasonable. J.R. took the second bedroom without discussion. He moved his things in on a Saturday, 2 bags and a plastic crate of school materials, and went out immediately to meet friends. And that was that. He and I maintained the same polite distance we'd established from the beginning. Good morning, good evening, passing each other in the kitchen with the careful choreography of people who have silently agreed not to require anything of each other. The neighborhood was lively in ways I was still getting used to. Karaoke from the house 3 doors down on weekend evenings, starting around 8 and sometimes running past midnight. A rooster somewhere close that had no concept of appropriate timing. Church bells on Sunday at 4:30 in the morning that I initially found maddening and eventually found oddly comforting, the way you do with sounds that become part of a place. There was a small basketball court at the end of the road, painted concrete, a bent hoop, and it had young men on it at nearly every hour of the day. I used to sit on the steps sometimes in the evening and watch them, and drink a San Miguel and think, this is a different kind of life. Not better necessarily. Different. Maravich's family came into sharper focus once we were living together. She was on her phone more than I'd realized, her siblings mostly. Her brother Rick, who had construction work when he could find it. Her sister Rowena, who was doing some kind of piecework from home. Her younger brother Dante, who was still in school. The calls were brief and practical. Logistics, mostly. Who needed dropping somewhere. What their mother needed from Mercury Drug. Whether their father's blood pressure tablets had been collected. Maravich managed all of this with no apparent effort, the way some people carry weight without seeming to carry anything at all. I noticed it without fully understanding it. I thought, she's organized, she's capable. Both things were true. What I didn't yet understand was that this wasn't just a personality trait. It was a position. The eldest daughter in a family with limited resources isn't just the most capable person. She's the load-bearing wall. Everything routes through her because everything is supposed to route through her. That's not cynicism. That's just how it works. And I didn't have a frame for it yet, because nothing in Clondalkin had prepared me for it. The marriage conversation came about 2 months after we moved in together. I want to be precise about how it happened because I've seen people online describe this kind of thing as a trap or a pressure campaign. And it wasn't that. It came up practically. I'd been on a tourist visa, doing visa runs every 2 months, a flight to Hong Kong or Kuala Lumpur, a night in a budget hotel, a flight back, stamps renewed. Inconvenient and not cheap. I'd read about the 13A spousal visa, which grants permanent residency if you're married to a Filipino citizen. We'd been together 8 months by then. We were living together. Neither of us was seeing anyone else. The visa situation was a genuine logistical problem with a logical solution. We talked about it plainly, the way we talked about most things. Whether it made sense, whether we both wanted it. She said she needed to speak to her parish priest, which I took at face value because in her world that was normal. A significant decision. A significant conversation first. He apparently had no objections, and the banns were posted. And we did the civil ceremony at the local municipal hall on a Wednesday morning with 2 witnesses and a lot of paperwork. The church blessing was the Saturday after. Her parish priest, a small, energetic man named Father Domingo, who shook my hand with both of his, led a short ceremony and said things about God's plan and the sanctity of family that I found myself listening to more carefully than I'd expected. I am not a practicing Catholic. I was raised one, the way most Irish people of my generation were raised one, which meant it was somewhere in the background like radio static, present, not really listened to. But there in that church, with Maravich beside me in a cream dress she'd bought at Ayala Mall and her mother crying in the front pew, I found the words landing rather than passing through. Her family held the reception in a bamboo pavilion out the back of her parents' place. 30 people, roughly. Lechon from a man who arrived on a motorcycle with the whole pig, already cooked and already spectacular, on a tray across the back. Pancit, rice, San Miguel in coolers, children running between the adults' legs. Her father made a short speech in Cebuano that someone translated for me afterward as being mostly about how he hoped I would look after his daughter, which was fair. I said I would. I meant that too. The wedding itself cost about 180,000 pesos, roughly 3,100 euros, which covered the food, the pavilion rental, the flowers, the priest's offering, and various other small costs that accumulated in the week beforehand. My daughters sent messages. Shaban was warm and careful in the way she is, said she hoped I was happy, and that she'd like to meet Maravich someday. Aoif from Toronto was more direct. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" I said yes. She said, "Okay then, congratulations." 2 months after the wedding, I sorted out the 13 visa paperwork. Not straightforward, but manageable. A stack of documents, trips to various offices, a fee of around 8,000 pesos, about 140 euros, just for the processing, plus associated costs. The visa granted permanent residency and meant no more visa runs, which was its own small relief. I was, officially, a resident. We settled into the rhythm of the thing. I contributed 25,000 pesos a month, about 430 euros, to cover our shared household costs. Rent, groceries, JR's school fees, utilities, the incidentals of daily life. This felt correct to me. I was living in the apartment. I was eating the food. JR was in school on my money, and I was glad of it, not grudging. It wasn't charity. It was participation. Then her mother's roof came up. Maravich raised it carefully, the way she raised things she found uncomfortable to raise. She didn't come to me directly. She mentioned it to the air, almost, that the patches her brother had applied after the last typhoon were starting to fail again, that the rainy season was coming, that she was trying to work out what to do. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, the same way she hadn't been looking at me when she mentioned the refrigeration unit. I asked how much. She said she'd been quoted 140,000 pesos, about 2,400 euros, for a proper repair. Not a patch, a repair. I sat with it 3 days. Then I agreed. The contractor came, did the work over 4 days, and the roof held. I went up and looked at it myself afterward, which felt slightly absurd, but which I needed to do. It was real. The work was done and the roof was solid, and her parents' house would get through the rainy season without buckets on the floor. That was reasonable. I told myself that was reasonable. And it was. Both things, I've come to understand, can be true simultaneously. After the roof, there was a different quality to the requests. Not more aggressive, never aggressive, just more frequent. And each one was real. That's the part one want to be clear about, because it would be easier if it wasn't. Maravich's nephew, Rowena's boy, was 8 years old and had appendicitis. This is not a fabricated emergency. Appendicitis in a child is appendicitis in a child. The hospital in Cebu City wanted 45,000 pesos up front, about 775 euros, before they'd schedule the surgery. I know that sounds extraordinary to Irish ears, but that's how it works there if you don't have coverage. You pay first. Rowena didn't have it. Maravich was on the phone to me from the hospital waiting area, speaking quietly the way she did when she was trying not to show how frightened she was. I transferred the money via GCash inside 20 minutes. The boy had his surgery. He was fine. About 6 weeks after that, a cousin's son needed school examination fees and uniform costs for the coming term. 12,000 pesos, about 207 euros. This one she did ask me about directly, which was a slight shift. She explained the situation, said she wouldn't blame me if I said no, that it wasn't my responsibility. I said I'd cover it. The truth is, I barely thought about it. 12,000 pesos was a Tuesday. I want to be honest about something here. I never felt mugged. That's not the right word for what was happening. Each thing was real, and each thing was the right thing to do in the moment. A sick child, a school uniform. What kind of man says no to those? But I think now that I was also, and I'm being unflattering about myself here, I think I was also finding a use for myself, a purpose. In Dublin, I'd been a man with money and nothing it needed to do. In Cebu, I was a man whose money mattered, whose presence made practical differences in people's lives. That felt good. I'm not proud of how much it felt good, but there it is. The water, as I said, finding its level. JR never warmed up. Through all of this, the wedding, the moves, the money going in and out, JR maintained the same careful, minimal engagement with me that he'd had from the start. I told myself repeatedly that this was normal. A boy of 16, 17, who'd lost his father, and now had some Irish stranger living in his house and sharing his mother's life. Of course he was cold. I'd have been cold too. I didn't push it, and he didn't push it, and we managed. There were moments, though. Small ones I pushed to the back. The way he'd sometimes go quiet in the middle of dinner when Maravich and I were talking. Not teenage disengaged quiet, but something more deliberate. The way he'd look at his mother sometimes when she laughed at something I said, a look I couldn't read at the time and am not sure I want to read now. I noticed these things. I filed them under. Adjustment. Grief. The complicated mess of being 17. Maybe that's what they were. I don't know. Christmas was good, though. I want to say that. It was genuinely good. I'd asked Maravich in November what the family usually did for Christmas, and she'd explained the Noche Buena, the Christmas Eve midnight meal, the whole family gathering, everyone together regardless of what else was going on. It mattered. So we sorted out a balikbayan box in early December, a big cardboard box shipped to her parents' place with things for everyone. Biscuits, chocolate, some vitamins for her father, a blouse for her mother, soap, shampoo, a few toys for the younger cousins. Maravich helped me pick things out at the SM Mall in Cebu City, walking the aisles and advising on what would be appreciated and what would land wrong. It cost maybe 9,000 pesos all in, about 155 euros. And the response when it arrived was out of all proportion to the contents. Her mother sent a voice message that went for 2 minutes. On Christmas Day itself, I got on a video call with Chauvin in Cork. Her husband was there, her 2 small ones running around in the background. I was sitting in our apartment in Cebu in a short-sleeved shirt, a San Miguel on the table, Maravich in the kitchen making something that smelled of garlic and coconut milk. Chauvin asked how I was doing, and I said I was grand, and for the first time in 2 years that wasn't a lie. I think she could tell. She went quiet for a second in the way she does, and then said she was glad, Dad. And that was that. I thought, this is all right. This is actually all right. And then January came, and Maravich mentioned the Sari Sari store. She raised it carefully. the way she raised everything she thought I might hesitate over. Her sister, Rowena, whose boy I'd helped with the hospital bill, needed income. The family's barangay had grown in the last few years, she said, but there was nowhere nearby to buy basic goods. People had to take a tricycle into town for cooking oil, for rice, for soap. A small store would have steady customers. Rowena was sensible, reliable, good with numbers. She'd run it herself. I went out and looked at the space. A concrete room attached to the side of her parents' house, about the size of a large garden shed. You could see immediately that it would work as a sari-sari store. The right location, a window that opened onto the street, enough room for shelving on 3 walls and a service counter across the front. I met Rowena. She had a list. She'd actually done the work of figuring out what stock would be needed, what the margins were, how long before it turned a profit. It was a real plan. 220,000 pesos to stock and set up. About 3,800 euros. Shelving, stock, a small refrigerator for cold drinks, the counter, a sign. At least, I thought, it was a thing you could point at. Not a repair, not a medical bill, something that would generate income, something that might eventually not need me. I agreed. Rowena was grateful in a way that was genuine and awkward and reminded me uncomfortably of how Maravich had looked about the refrigeration unit. That same embarrassment at receiving help. I took some comfort in that. The store opened in February. It did have customers. People came. Rowena was there every morning. I walked past once and bought a Coke just to see, and she charged me the correct price without any fuss, which I appreciated enormously. I should have registered some kind of partnership, some paperwork with my name on it. I know that now. At the time, it didn't occur to me because it wasn't how I was thinking about it. I wasn't thinking like a businessman. I was thinking like a husband. That, in the end, was most of the problem. The house idea came from Rick. Well, it came through Maravich, but Rick was there when she raised it, sitting at our kitchen table with a San Miguel he'd brought himself, which I always appreciated about him. He never arrived empty-handed, never assumed. He was quiet, like Maravich, same economy of movement. And he waited until she'd finished explaining before he nodded once, as if to confirm the details were accurate. The situation was this. Rick had land registered in the family name, a plot about half an hour outside town, toward the hills, where the air was slightly less thick, and the road turned to packed dirt between the coconut palms. The land had been in the family for 2 generations, about 350 square meters, enough for a modest house with a yard. Rick wasn't using it. He had a small place closer to town where he lived with his wife. The proposal was that we'd build on it. Maravich and me. Our house. Not a rented apartment where the school teacher downstairs watched us come and go. Something permanent. Something ours. Somewhere we'd actually chosen. I knew the rule. I want to be clear about that because some of the men who end up in these situations claim they didn't know. And I won't claim that. I'd read it clearly on multiple forums. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. The 1987 Constitution. No exceptions for marriage, no workarounds that hold up. I raised this at the table plainly. Maravich nodded. Rick nodded. They'd expected the question. Maravich explained, Rick would hold the title as he already did. But we'd have a notarized agreement, a document that acknowledged my financial contribution to the construction, that established the intention that the house was our shared home, that would, in theory, protect my investment if anything went wrong. Rick said he'd sign whatever I needed him to sign. He said it without apparent discomfort, which, at the time, I read as reassurance. I think about that conversation a lot now. Not because anyone lied to me. The land was real. Rick owned it. The notarized agreement was real. I have it somewhere in a folder in Phibbsboro, for all the use it is. What I didn't properly understand was that a notarized agreement acknowledging a contribution is not the same thing as having a legal claim. Philippine courts don't look fondly on arrangements designed to circumvent the foreign land ownership prohibition, whatever the accompanying paperwork says. But I didn't consult a property lawyer. I should have. Didn't. The total budget for the build was estimated at around 950,000 pesos, roughly 16,300 euros, for a modest two-bedroom house, tiled floors, a covered terrace, proper wiring. Not lavish, functional. I didn't transfer it all at once. It came in tranches as the work progressed, which was sensible as a general principle. First tranche, 120,000 pesos for groundwork and the foundation. I drove out with Rick and watched the men working. Concrete poured, rebar set, the smell of dust and wet cement in the heat. It was real. Second tranche, 180,000 pesos for materials and the walls going up. I visited the site on a Sunday. Walls were rising. You could see the shape of the rooms. Then the rainy season hit in earnest, and the access road to the site became difficult, and the work stopped for 6 weeks. Understandable. This happens in construction everywhere. Then there was a materials cost increase. Steel had gone up. The budget needed revising, an additional 90,000 pesos to keep the original specification. I agreed. Then Rick mentioned a boundary issue with the neighbor to the east. Nothing serious, he said. Just a survey discrepancy that needed to go through the barangay office to resolve. This took 3 months. Work slowed, but didn't fully stop. Some interior prep continued, electrical rough-in, that sort of thing. By the time I left for Dublin in late April 2025, I'd transferred a total of 850,000 pesos, about 14,600 euros. The foundation was solid. The walls were up to window height on 3 sides. The 4th side was framed but not yet filled. The roof structure was partially erected. It was, genuinely, a house in progress. Not a fiction. Not a plot of empty land with a few stakes in the ground. A real thing being built at a real pace that was slower than I'd hoped, but not, I kept telling myself, suspiciously slow. The Dublin trip was 6 weeks. Chauvin's wedding in Cork, a proper do in a hotel in Kinsale, both my daughters there, Awif flying in from Toronto, the first time I'd been in the same room as both of them in 3 years. The pension office had sent letters that needed attending to in person. And I'd been putting off a medical check. Nothing specific, just the things you put off when you're busy being elsewhere. Before I left, Maravich seemed fine, present. We had dinner the night before my flight, a place near the waterfront that did good grilled fish, and she was there in the way she normally was. Not demonstrative, but there. I didn't feel anything was wrong. At the airport the following morning, I noticed she seemed lighter saying goodbye than I'd expected. Not cold, just relieved, maybe. I thought, she's tired and she's been managing a lot, and 6 weeks without a Kano husband underfoot is probably a welcome rest. That was a fair reading. It might even have been correct. But I think about that moment at the departure gate. The way she smiled. It was a real smile. I just don't know what it was for. Chauvin's wedding was beautiful. I danced badly at the reception and didn't care. Awif told me I looked better than she'd expected, which from Awif is high praise. I came back in early June. The apartment felt different immediately. Not in any way I could point to. The same furniture, the same kitchen smell, the same view of the street from the window. Maravich was there. She'd made food. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the place. The way a room can be the same room and also somehow changed. And you can't explain it to anyone because there's nothing to point at. I asked how she was. She said tired. I asked a few days later whether everything was all right. She said she was fine, just overwhelmed. Her father's health had been up and down while I was away. Rowena had had some trouble with a supplier for the store. Dante had missed some school. The load-bearing wall bearing its load, which was real, which was genuinely true. I accepted it. JR was 17 now. He'd been in school during most of my Dublin trip and had apparently done well on his mid-year exams. When I came back, he said hello with slightly more warmth than usual, which at the time I took as a sign of gradual, welcome progress. I understand it differently now. It was the warmth of someone who is sorry for you. I lay awake some nights listening to Cebu, doing what it does at 2 in the morning. Scooters on the main road, a dog somewhere, the distant pulse of karaoke from the direction of the town square, someone's rooster starting early, Maravik asleep beside me, or apparently asleep. And I'd feel, in those moments, the specific loneliness of being alongside someone who wasn't quite there. I'd felt alone in a house before. In Clondalkin, after Ina, the whole place was just absence. But this was different. This was alone inside a marriage that was still functionally intact. Same bed, same meals, same apartment. Just the sense that her attention was somewhere I couldn't see. I told myself it was the weight she was carrying. She'd told me herself, "I don't understand what it's like when you're the one everyone comes to." She wasn't wrong about that. I didn't understand it. I still don't. Fully. 3 weeks after I got back, JR spoke. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because there was a program on the television I'd been half watching, some Filipino game show with a lot of shouting, and I'd turned it off because I couldn't follow it, and the noise was getting on my nerves. Maravich was at her parents' place for the evening. Her father had a checkup scheduled the next morning, and her mother wanted company. JR was in the kitchen doing dishes. I was at the table with a glass of water and nothing in particular to think about. He said it without turning around. Just, "You know there's someone else." I asked him to say it again. Not because I hadn't heard him. I just needed a moment. He turned off the tap, dried his hands on the dish towel. Still didn't look at me. He said there was a man from their home province, their original barangay where the family was from, before they moved to town. Someone Maravich had known a long time, before her first husband. He thought it had been going on most of the past year, maybe longer. He wasn't certain of the details. He just knew. He said it without cruelty. That's the part one keep coming back to. There was no satisfaction in it, no teenage relish at delivering bad news to the Irishman. He sounded more tired than anything, like he'd been carrying it for a long time and had simply run out of the energy required to keep carrying it. He went to his room. We didn't speak again that night. I sat at that table for a while. I'm not sure how long. The street outside was doing its usual things. A tricycle going past, voices somewhere, the persistent dog 2 houses down. I had another glass of water. I thought about the departure gate at the airport, the particular quality of that smile. I didn't say anything to Maravich for 2 days. What I did instead was go back through the past year in my head, the way you'd go back through a timetable looking for where the delay actually started. The phone she always kept face down on the table. The evenings she said she needed to visit her mother and came back later than expected. The way she'd gone quiet sometimes during conversations. Not distracted quiet, but somewhere else quiet. The comment about not understanding what it was like when everyone came to you. Was that about her family? Or was it about me? Was I part of the wait? I genuinely didn't know. I still don't. On the Thursday, I asked her. After dinner, dishes done, JR in his room. I waited until the apartment was quiet. I asked her directly, not with anger, because I didn't feel anger exactly, or not yet. Just with the flatness I have. The flatness I developed on 32 years of platforms when something went wrong on the line, and you had to state the problem clearly before you could deal with it. She deflected once, said she didn't know what I meant. Then she went quiet for a long time. Then she started to cry. She didn't deny it for long after that. She confirmed the man existed, confirmed it had been ongoing. And then she said the things she needed to say, and I sat and listened to them, and I'm going to tell you what she said, because I think it's important, and because I don't want to misrepresent her. She said she had been lonely in ways she hadn't known how to explain to me. Not because I was unkind, she said that clearly, more than once, but because I was a different kind of person in a different kind of life, and there were things between us that didn't translate, and she hadn't known how to bridge them. And the loneliness had been there from early on, and she hadn't been able to make it stop. She said she felt like a resource, not just to me, to everyone, her whole family, every direction she turned. She said she cared for me. She said that quietly and separately, not as a justification, just as a fact she wanted me to have. She said something about God's plan that I almost understood, that things happen for reasons we can't see, that she was sorry. And I said, and I want to be precise about this, because it's the truest thing I said in that whole conversation. I said, I believe you. I don't think that's the point. She didn't leave that night. I don't think she knew what to do next either. I rang a lawyer the following morning, an English-speaking firm in Cebu City I found through the expat forum, the same forum that had told me the town was cheaper and quieter and friendlier. The lawyer was thorough and not unkind, and told me what I'd suspected. The notarized agreement with Rick was a document acknowledging my contribution, not a legally enforceable claim to the property. Challenging it would require civil litigation that could run for years, would likely cost more than the remaining construction value, and had uncertain prospects given the constitutional prohibition on foreign land ownership. His professional advice was to let it go. The sari-sari store, no registered partnership, no documentation with my name attached. Rowena ran it. It was a family business. I had no standing. The money transferred over 2 years for the roof, the medical bills, the school fees, all of it, gone cleanly, the way water goes once it's in the ground. No mechanism for recovery. That's not a criticism of the law. That's just what it was. Total loss. Somewhere between 28,000 euros and 32,000 euros when I added it all up, not counting living costs, flights, the ordinary expenses of 2 years lived somewhere. The capital in the credit union was largely intact. The pension was untouched. I was going to be all right in the basic financial sense, which is the sense that matters least when you're sitting in a lawyer's office in Cebu City being told what you can and can't recover. I booked a flight that week. A Tuesday, as it happened. I packed what I'd brought with me, which wasn't much. A man who's sold his house doesn't accumulate things easily. 2 bags, some books. The folder with the notarized agreement, which I took out of some residual instinct toward completeness, not because I thought it would ever be useful. Maravich and I didn't have another conversation like the first one. We spoke, practically, about the departure. She wasn't cold. She wasn't warm in the way she'd once been. We were 2 people who had needed something from each other and had found it for a while. And then it had gone. At the airport, I got a grab to the terminal. She wasn't there to see me off. JR sent me a message at around the time I was going through security. Just 2 words. Safe travels. I thought about that message the whole way to Manila, the whole flight to Heathrow, most of the connection to Dublin. Safe travels. From a 17-year-old boy who had never wanted me there and who had, in the end, been the only one who told me the truth. Siobhan met me at Dublin Airport. She didn't ask questions in the car, which is the kindest thing anyone did for me in that whole period. She just drove, and we talked about her kids, and she didn't once say, "I told you so," even though my wife had said it on the phone from Toronto with considerably less restraint. I stayed in Cork for 3 weeks, slept in the spare room, ate her food, watched her children have their ordinary, chaotic mornings, and found it, unexpectedly, the most restorative thing available to me. Then I came back to Dublin and got a flat in Phibsborough. I chose it specifically because it wasn't somewhere I had a history. Clondalkin was where Aine and I had lived. Lucan was where I'd gone after she died, trying to stay near, but not in the same place. Phibsborough is north of the Liffey, not my part of the city, and nobody there knows my name or my story. That suited me. The flat is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen, a sitting room with a window that looks out at the back of another building. It rains on it the way Dublin rain does, which is to say, frequently and without apology, and I've spent more time than is probably healthy sitting at that window watching it. So, the numbers. I'm going to give them to you plainly, because that's the point of this, isn't it? The whole story is the point of this, but the numbers are what people come here for, and they're fair to want. Between the wedding, the roof, the nephew's hospital bill, the school fees, the Sari store, and the house construction tranches, I transferred approximately 28,000 euros to 32,000 euros over 2 years. The monthly household contribution of 25,000 pesos, about 430 euros a month. I'm not counting that, because that was rent and food and a shared life, and I'd have spent something equivalent anywhere I was living. That money was spent, not lost. The 28,000 euros to 32,000 euros is gone. There's no paperwork that helps me. The house is on Rick's land, and it will stay on Rick's land. The Sari store is Rowena's. The roof of her parents' house is solid. The nephew is healthy. I don't say this bitterly. I say it because it's true, and because the truth of it is part of what 1,100 trying to explain. The 158,000 euros from the house sale is mostly there. The pension keeps coming every month. I am going to be financially all right, which I say without comfort, because I know that's not what this story is about. What I actually lost doesn't have a number on it. I lost 2 years, and I lost the particular version of myself that had started to believe he was going to be okay. Not happy exactly, but okay, which after Aine was more than I'd been hoping for. I lost the thing I'd gone there to find, which wasn't really the Philippines and wasn't really Maravich. It was the possibility that I could belong somewhere again, that there was still somewhere to belong to. I think about Maravich sometimes, more than I'd like to, and less bitterly than you might expect. She wasn't a scammer. I want to say that clearly, because I've read enough of these stories to know that's the shorthand people reach for, and it isn't right here. The Carinderia was real. Her first husband was real, and his death was real. Her family's obligations were real, genuinely, structurally real, not performed for my benefit. The loneliness she described was probably real. The other man was real. All of it was real, and none of it was quite what I thought it was. She needed a provider. I needed a purpose. We found each other at the worst possible time for both those needs, when neither of us was in a position to offer what the other actually required. She needed someone who understood what it meant to be an eldest daughter in a Filipino family in a way that I never could have, regardless of how much I read about it. And I needed to grieve Ine properly, which is the thing I hadn't done. She had her own grief. She had her own emptiness. I just don't think I was the answer to it. I just thought I was. There are things I'd say to anyone watching this who's thinking about making a similar move. Not rules, just things I know now that I didn't know then. If your name isn't on the title, the property isn't yours, not in any meaningful sense. Marriage doesn't change that in the Philippines. A notarized agreement doesn't change that. Consult a property lawyer before you transfer a single peso toward land or construction. Not after. Before. The absence of early requests is not proof of good intentions. It might just be patience. Family obligation in the Philippines is genuine and structural, and it does not stop being a problem just because it's sincere. It is not manipulation. It is also not sustainable for most Western men. You need to understand what you're walking into before you walk into it. And this last one is the one I'd most want someone to hear. Grief is not a travel strategy. Going somewhere warm doesn't move it. It doesn't dissolve in the heat. It doesn't get left behind in the departure lounge. It comes with you in your carry-on, and it sits beside you on the plane, and it's there when you land. The only thing the Philippines gave my grief was a different backdrop. I knew she wasn't Ine. I just thought that didn't matter anymore. Turns out it still mattered. It just mattered in a different direction. That's Niall's story, and we're grateful to him for telling it. What makes this one stay with you, at least what makes it stay with me, is that there's no clean villain here. There's no stranger on the internet who was never real. There's a real woman, a real family, real obligations, and two people who needed things from each other that neither of them could ultimately provide. The Philippines didn't break Niall. Grief broke Niall years before he boarded that plane. The Philippines was just where he went to avoid noticing. A few things worth knowing if you're planning a move. Under the 1987 Philippine Constitution, foreign nationals cannot own land. Full stop. A notarized agreement acknowledging your financial contribution to construction is not a legal claim. It is a piece of paper. Any arrangement that roots around the land ownership prohibition is unlikely to protect you if the relationship ends. On business, if you invest in a store, a restaurant, or any small enterprise, register a formal partnership with documentation in your name before a single peso changes hands. Without paperwork, you have no standing. None of this means you shouldn't go. Inside the Philippines is not here to tell you to stay home. It's here to tell you what it actually looks like on the ground, from the people who've been there, so that if you go with your eyes open. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Niall for his honesty and his time. If this story reached you, share it with someone who's planning a move or who's in the middle of one. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and know what you're signing before you sign it.